Hello and welcome to Gareth Icke Tonight. The act of war is as old as time. That's what we're told. It's like death and taxes, right? It's inevitable. At least that's what the powers that be would have us believe, because if you believe something is inevitable, then you, by very definition of the word, are powerless to stop it. I'm more inclined to align my beliefs on the inevitability of war with the American author Margaret Mead. Her view was that warfare is only an invention. It's not a biological necessity. Well, a penny for her thoughts on the state of the world, should she still be alive today. The war between Ukraine and Russia is still at full swing, 1,280 days in. Of course, the conflict goes back a lot further than that, and despite the Western media propaganda that Ukraine is somehow winning the war, or at least holding their own, the number of Ukrainian dead is evidenced by the conscription of over 60s to the front line. It's a massacre that no one in government wants to admit, as they wash another few billion pounds of taxpayer money through Kyiv. China, we're told, are preparing to invade Taiwan. At the same time, the US are arming the Taiwanese. So that feels like a powder keg about to go off. But fortunately, for the moment at least, they seem content with arguing about the finer details of the official story of World War II. I doubt either of them will be willing to give the full, unredacted, factually accurate historical account, though, because that's not what governments do, is it? Israel is carrying out its long-planned goal of ethnically cleansing the not-so-holy land of Palestinians by the means of mass murder and mass starvation. They're doing it in front of the world's eyes with only the odd weak and insincere statement of condemnation from the bought and paid for and or compromised politicians. The Sudanese civil war is in its second year, with rape and murder of civilians a daily occurrence. Now, I say civil war, but given the Sudan was listed as one of the 7 Muslim countries that the US military whistleblower General Wesley Clark says was to be taken out by the United States when he was interviewed in 2003, I question just how organically the civil war came to be. ISIS are apparently back from hiatus and are planning to attack the West. That's when they're done eating porcupines in caves in Somalia. Sky News said they're eating them, so it must be true. But as with Sudan, Somalia is also one of the 7 to be invaded countries. So the creation of an ISIS bogeyman within their borders feels, well, shall we say, constructed. And then comes Iran, the final nation on Wesley Clark's Big 7, the Piece de la Résistance. Israel and Iran exchanged rocket fire back in June, and it felt like we were on the verge of a major global conflict, especially when Donald Trump ordered US missile attacks on Iranian nuclear facilities. Thankfully, tensions calmed, at least on the surface, and a ceasefire between the two nations was put in place. Iran licked its wounds, Trump and his supporters lauded his peace-through-strength stance, and Israel turned its attention to killing journalists in Gaza and approving internationally illegal settlements in the West Bank. We, the prescribed black-pilled doom-mongers, stated that the ceasefire wouldn't last because it was never meant to. It was only ever a matter of time before the drums of war were audibly coming out of Benjamin Netanyahu's office. See, Iran gave Israel a bloody nose with their missile attacks on Tel Aviv and Beersheba. The much celebrated Iron Dome was found wanting, and despite Israel banning their media from reporting on the damage inflicted by the Iranians, footage found itself onto social media, and it wasn't pretty. Iran wasn't letting up either, and if anything, the attacks were intensifying, with Israel helpless to stop them. Now, Israel and their lapdog US needed an off-ramp. But like all narcissistic psychopaths, their leaders needed to save face while swerving off the freeway. Trump's attacks on Iran secured that. They could claim they'd destroyed Iran's nuclear capabilities, and therefore the objective was achieved and a ceasefire possible. Well, that was never going to be the end, because it's never been about Iran's nuclear program. That's merely the excuse for the attack. What it's really about is destroying the only major nation in the Middle East with the power and will to oppose Israel and America's regional dominance. All the others, Libya, Iraq, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, etc., have either been destroyed or infiltrated. And they want the same for Iran. The exiled pro-Israel Crown Prince, Reza Pahlavi, is waiting in the wings to take over should the current Iranian regime fall. He's already been pictured praying at the wall in Jerusalem, so we know he will be acceptable to the Western powers that be. Seems to be a prerequisite for some reason. I'll also make clear I've got no skin in the game for the current Iranian regime, by the way, although it might be worth noting the US and UK's involvement in regime change in Iran over the years. Another obvious piece of evidence that the ceasefire was never a long-term plan came in two forms. First of all, the Israelis almost immediately claimed that the US had failed to take out all of Iran's nuclear facilities. That strategically left the door open for the Iran is building a nuclear weapon claim to be used once again to justify military action. Second of all, as soon as the ceasefire began, the US started sending enormous shipments of weapons to Israel and approved the handing over of another bumper military aid package of American taxpayer money. It's pretty obvious to those with eyes to see that it was only a matter of time until we were once again asked to pick a side in the death of human beings board game. So imagine my shock as I read that there are conversations about preemptive strikes against Iran suddenly starting to enter the political discourse in Israel. Retired Israeli Colonel Jacques Neraya has warned that war is imminent and urged Israel to carry out preemptive strikes on Iran. Early last week, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz threatened to repeat a deadly June strike in Tehran and target the supreme leader. That's when Katz wasn't tweeting about enacting a plague of the firstborns in Yemen. Yep, he actually wrote down those words on a public forum. Lunatic. It's also claimed that Israeli Chief of Staff Al-Zamir spoke on military radio about another round of attacks against Iran. So the signals don't look good. They don't look good at all. And so we yet again find ourselves and our futures hanging on the words and actions of the worst among us. Psychopathic political representatives of the military-industrial complex, much like the psychopathic political representatives of the pharmaceutical-industrial complex, same people, care not for the plight of mankind. Sorry, people kind. I miss Justin Trudeau's isms. The complex cares not who falls victim to its drive to be all-consuming, and so I find myself asking why we allow it to be this way. Am I, even in my 44th year upon this earth, just simply being naive in asking myself that question? Why do we allow those that openly hate us control our destinies as if we were nothing more than expendable pawns on a giant blood-drenched chessboard? I don't believe war is inevitable, as is claimed. That's just a trick they play to prevent us from resisting. They're using the same play while getting the public to accept the AI takeover of their lives. AI will take our jobs. That sucks, but it's inevitable. Says who? Well, those that actively promote AI. So there's no conflict of interest there then. I best just sit back, accept my universal basic income. Yeah, well, there's no point fighting back because it's all predetermined, isn't it? It's inevitable. Well, how about no? How about we don't accept the unavoidability of mass death, destruction, pain, fear, and subjugation to technology? How about we use that wonderful piece of natural infrastructure that we were fortunate enough to be born within us, a spine, and we stand up and say, nope, not having it. Just like many of us did when the injectables were rolled out and it was claimed we couldn't have our lives back until every single one of us agreed to roll up our sleeves. That was claimed to be an inevitability by the likes of Bill Gates, and yet we stood up and very loudly declined. To bring Margaret Mead back into the conversation, I'll end on another of her statements, perhaps more famous than the quote I recalled earlier. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Ain't that the truth? I'm up for it, if you are.